apology that my slides did that big jerk again tonight. Unfortunately, there's 27 of them in this tonight, so I'm going to go fast. Don't worry, we won't go over 8:30. But I haven't been able to fix them all. It's just, because I have to just squeeze all the graphics. So I'll talk you through them. And again, we're a small group tonight, so it can be very informal and so forth. But let's begin with a prayer. And we have somebody coming in. Oh, okay. And he's probably coming to congratulate you guys. Again, it's, wow, that's spectacular, Hopefully the journey will just keep getting richer and deeper and so forth as you go, so that it all bears fruit. Father, welcome. How are you? Would you like to speak at all, Father, or you just here visiting, or?
Just wanted to give, I meant to call you, and I forgot to call you.
That's all right.
Give like a 1-minute frugal.
Absolutely.
And then a parishioner has very generously offered to give to those who have come into the faith, just some little devotions and things.
Okay. It's all yours. I haven't really started, so.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a quick question. Was that not the longest Mass you've ever been to on Saturday? Was it a little bit long?
I didn't think it was long, but I guess the people that I invited, they were like, 3 hours, Karen? Really?
I was trying for 2 hours and a half. It was not 3 hours.
I think it was 2 hours and like
2 hours and 45 minutes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, it was long. It was long, but
It's beautiful.
we want things that are good and beautiful and long. They didn't have to go to church the next day, though. You didn't have to go the next day.
I did anyway.
You didn't have to go the
did
next
too.
day.
I did too.
You went the next day. Okay, you didn't need to.
My daughter and her
Catholic guilt has started already, isn't
my
it?
daughter and her boyfriend wanted to go. And he's Catholic. So
Oh, good.
Very promising.
That's good. So in the coming, I'm going to let you deal with all the main stuff, but in the coming weeks, the thing that I mentioned to you afterwards, look for the gifts of the Holy Spirit being active. And I would review, if you don't mind, if you were there the night I taught it or have the little cheat sheet on it, just look at how you can practice those gifts. So for you, for baptism, faith, hope, and love, and for both of you, wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. And just, you'll notice that I noticed, honestly, the sacrament I felt most was confirmation, not even more so than ordination. Ordination was more weighty in regards to, now I have responsibility, but in regards to that which benefited me personally, I really felt confirmation. So I just want to encourage you that. A wonderful woman has put some different devotions together. Now, these are little options for various things. You are under no obligation, unlike the stuff that we taught you, what you have to do, go to Mass, things like that. These are just things to introduce you to the great bounty of devotions, which we spoke a little bit about. Do not feel obligated. Even the Rosary, you don't have to feel obligated, although I encourage it. Look through this if you wish. There are just little examples of, like Catholic servant is in here. There are examples of different things of culture, different little things you could learn in regards to just reading materials. And like a little Rosary, Padre Pio. Look through it. Don't feel obligated. Things can be thrown away that you are not interested in. Okay? And they are slightly different.
Thank
Very
you.
good. And again, it's just a kind of a potpourri of various Catholic things.
Very nice.
But again, not there are some moral teachings in there in general, but just something that a parishioner put together as a gift.
So nice.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Father.
Thank you.
Good to see you. So as Father mentioned, kind of segue back into what we're doing, as we look at these last 2 weeks, as you brought up the term mystagogy, which fancy term, what does that mean?
Can you just explain again what that is?
Sure. Not well, but I'll try it. Okay. Mystagogy is kind of getting into the mystery. Okay? Think of it this way. Let's say you were getting married. Okay? Are you entering a mystery? Big time. Okay? First of all, part of that mystery is you. You're going to discover things about yourself that you had no idea. And about this other person who is going to remain mysterious to you if you're married for 80 years. Okay. And that's part of the beauty of the journey. Now, mystagogy focuses on prayer. Okay. Now, if I asked one of you to define prayer, anybody want to take a shot at that? A nice, crisp, fine, quick definition of prayer?
Conversation with the Lord.
That's not bad. Not bad at all. Teresa of Avila, no, excuse me, Teresa of Lisieux. I'm big on Teresas. I love them. Once said, it is the lifting of the heart and mind to God. And I love that. Now, she died at 24, you know. Patron saint of missionaries, and, you know, died very young of TB, wasn't it? I think that eventually took her. Never really, she went to Rome once and boldly went in front of the Pope asking if she could get into Carmel early. She was a Carmelite nun. Remarkable lady, The Little Way. Anybody read that book, The Little Way? Okay. Now, I don't know what you thought. I'd be curious, though. When I first started to read it, I thought she was nuts. I felt that way for about the first maybe 40 pages, and it's not that long a book. You know, I was getting out to a third anyway. It just so happened, I have a friend in my home parish, and he and I will talk, and we ask those dumb questions, you know, any good spiritual books lately? And it just so happened, by pure coincidence, he was also reading, but he was about 25 or 30 pages ahead of me. And he said, hang in there, it gets good. And it really does. But in her early life, I thought, this woman is crazy. Why is everybody thinking the world of her? And now I love her. The raising of the heart and mind to God, to enter into this mystery and dialogue. If we think of one of the best bits of advice I ever got about marriage, shortly after I got married, and this was a little weird. My wife and I ended up doing Cana couples for like 30 some years, but we got drafted about 4 or 5 years into marriage. We were the young kids. Why they drafted us, I asked Father if he'd been wearing his collar too tight. So we had to go do the weekend with the engaged couples, you know, the one they used to go to, and whatever they do these days, I don't know exactly. And the speaker at that time was a man I've known for a lot of years, Jack Quinnell, marriage counselor and so forth. And he said something simple. He said to the young couples, he said, make sure after you get married, you talk at least 5 minutes a day. Now, a lot of these guys aren't married yet, and they had a look on their face like he had just told them to go outside and chew on the lawn or something. It made no sense. Now, my wife and I are sitting there, and we're married again about 4 or 5 years, and I'm thinking, he's absolutely right. Because once you're together in the same house, you can kind of assume things. And like early in our years, we weren't blessed with children early, and we're working and getting involved. And because we were available, being drafted to be on boards and things like that. And the next thing you know, we found ourselves not being very good at communicating with each other. And that was something we had to do. And so the same thing is true about our prayer life. We need to pray. Now, again, you guys may be all over the map, and I'm certainly no expert on prayer, okay? But we simply have to be faithful to it. Whatever it is, be faithful to it. Over time, it may adapt, change. You may learn things. You may, I hope through tonight and next week, you'll get a sense of what your natural strengths and weaknesses might be in terms of becoming the spiritual person that you want to be. And so I don't know if I've answered your question, but I hope I'm painting a little bit of a picture, and maybe if I don't get there, ask it again. All right, we'll hopefully get there. So, all right, let's get started. Now, again, my first apologies is because those who came in late, the bump down happened, but instead of having 8 or 9 slides like I usually do, I have 27. So I got through about 10. Other than that, I'll have to translate for you, but we'll live with it. It won't matter too much. Let's begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. This is from Mark 12. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but I've always, in fact, one year, I actually did an entire series on just the first sentence. I did a 5-part series on just that, because there's a whole lot in there. How do we love God with our minds, with all our strength, with all our soul, with all our heart? Okay, so let's jump ahead. Some of you have been around the church a while. Are you familiar with Matthew Kelly? Okay. Now, Matthew Kelly is a guy, some people love him, some don't think that much of him. I'm a fan in this sense. I think he is one of the best at getting to the very basics and the very heart of where the church is in the United States. His institute looks at that. He's an Australian, but he studies the church and church trends and worship trends and so forth. He began life as a motivational speaker. And so for many, they think, oh, he's so shallow. And his books are written to be utterly accessible. I think almost any, my dog, I don't think could read them and necessarily get a lot out of them. But if you're above that, I think you could do okay. And he's a man of substance, but I think he's trying to keep his stuff accessible. And he wrote a book years ago, and he virtually gives away his books. When a parish gives Matthew Kelly books, they pay for the postage. I don't know if you know that, but I know a number of authors like that. I guess it's one of the ways you become a best-selling author too. You virtually give them away. But he's a very generous guy. My son went to Steubenville, Franciscan, great college, and got to spend a semester in Austria. Matthew Kelly, before I had ever even known who he was, sent him a book. He sends it to a hardcover of, I forget which book it was in his series, because he's grateful because when he was burning out, kind of his first hit the wall of a guy's traveling all around the world and doing all these talks and all that, he went there and spent some months at that, it's an old abbey is what it is, in Austria. And he was so grateful to Franciscan and what they did for him while he was there. He just went on retreat. And what he found in the students, what he found in the staff and everything, and the setting's not bad either. Kind of the foothills of the Austrian Alps. He just took off, and he said out of gratitude, he sends this thing apparently every year to every student from the college who goes there. So the dynamic Catholicism, this is what we want for all of you, okay? We don't want you to just kind of, I've sort of changed hats from what I was and what I am now. And this is true whether or not we entered the church, as these wonderful young people have done, or whether you're my age or older. I got to be a better one tomorrow than I am today. That ongoing growth and conversion. How do I keep my faith growing? Because your faith, it will not be faith per se in heaven, but your understanding of God and so forth continues to grow in heaven. I have told you guys the baseball joke, right? I didn't? Oh, I better tell it. I tell it every year, and I get a lot of groans every year with it. There's these two guys. They love baseball. They grew up together, played baseball, did all this, right? As they grew up, they played high school, college ball, that kind of thing, town ball. They kept playing well into their 50s and 60s. They kept playing in the adult leagues. They just loved baseball. And they were both, pretty spiritual guys. And they wondered, is there going to be baseball in heaven? And of course, they always talk about other dogs in heaven, but what about baseball? Same argument, really, Are the things in this earth going to be there? So they made a pact that whatever one died first, he would try to get the info back to the other guy, okay? So anyway, the guy who passes away has the other guys, one of his pallbearers at his wedding and all this and so forth. And, about a week later, his surviving friend is laying in bed one night. There's a terrible storm, lightning, crashing of thunder, and there's this finally big boom that jolts him up. And he looks, and his buddy kind of in a shimmering, ghostly view, is standing at the foot of his bed. And of course, after he overcomes some of the shock, he says, okay, we talk a little bit. Well, you going to tell me? Is there baseball in heaven? And the guy said, well, I got good news and I got bad news. He said, what's the good news? Definitely baseball in heaven. What's the bad news? You're scheduled to pitch on Friday. So anyway, we'll leave that at that. So what we're going to be doing tonight is trying to get at the idea of your spiritual temperaments. Now, did any of you, I know it was weeks ago, have a chance to go through the online quiz?
I did.
Okay. Now, would you mind sharing your results? It's up to you.
Yes.
You were the first to respond, so Laura?
Yes. Well, I took it a couple times.
That's okay.
And different sites. But they're all pretty consistent.
Okay. They're pretty consistent, which means you're probably on the money.
Yeah.
Not everybody is, by the way, on these
Well,
tests.
there were two. Like
Yeah, you come up with a primary and a secondary.
Oh, I don't know which was which. The melancholy and then what's it called? The one that starts with a C.
Choleric.
Choleric.
Melancholic choleric. Okay. Who's next?
Well, mine was, I didn't know there were two of them.
I didn't do
Yeah, you have a primary and a secondary usually. If you took the one that I did, it weeds you down to those two, and it will usually give you a percentage. Maybe in your case, you're 65% choleric and maybe 35% the other, if I've done the math right.
It was, I don't know how to pronounce it, phlegmatic.
Phlegmatic. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Wanda?
I was
Phlegmatic?
68%,
Mm-hmm.
and melancholic, 32%.
Remarkable.
phlegmatic and
Phlegmatic and sanguine.
sanguine.
Okay.
I was melancholic, 63%,
Mhm.
and choleric, 37%.
Okay. Over here, I thought at least one or two of you did. Go for it.
Choleric and sanguine.
Okay.
I don't know, it was something like 65, 35.
Okay.
something like that.
All right. So we've at least touched all the temperaments. Now, if you haven't studied this stuff, you may not know what these terms mean and all that. We'll go through a few things on spirituality, and then we'll jump into the temperaments, and we'll cover two of the temperaments tonight very fast. And then we'll go from there, okay? The goal is to understand in you, and as you get to understand them, you begin to understand people around you. My suspicion is, for some of you, as you hear more and more of this, a light bulb's going to go on about the person in that next cubicle at work, or your spouse, or someone you might be dating, or whatever the case might be. Okay, anyway, we'll see. And I hope it's helpful, because I know when I first studied this, it was probably around 1990. A lot of light bulbs went on, and plus it's very old stuff. It began with Hippocrates, pre-Christian, okay? And the church used it a lot for many years. It's not as popular right now in terms of formal use, but this was used in seminaries quite a bit, I would say, up to the 1940s. They'd help sort their people. Everybody's into Ignatian spirituality. That seems to be in vogue now in seminaries, so I'm not sure why, but it is. Okay. Faith, hope, and charity, the life of prayer. Our goal of prayer is not an end in and of itself, but rather it enables us to grow in faith, hope, and charity. A few things here, a few quotes that I had to squeeze too many things in, so I had to kick out qualities, but we have only the vaguest idea as to the perfection which is proposed to us and the means to attain it. Now, one of the key means to attain it is a life of rich prayer. Now, if you couple that with a good sacramental life, get out of the way. That's the only thing I can tell you. A lot of growth can happen. It doesn't mean we're always going to see it. Those of you who are old veteran Catholics like me, have you ever felt that, gosh, I seem to be going nowhere in prayer and in my spiritual life and so forth? You ever felt that way? Where you're at a flat spot, an arid spot, maybe even think you're backsliding. And you can. It's possible. Be careful. Don't judge it based on your feelings. Always judge it based on your virtue. Are you more charitable now than you were a month ago? Do you put up with that colleague in the next cubicle who can really, let's just say, has a little sandpaper in their personality, at least as far as you're concerned? How are you dealing with them? Those are good signs. Watch that. If you're growing in charity, even if your prayer life feels like it's a mess, stay the course. You're probably on a very good path. Again, oftentimes one of the things we judge everything emotionally, and we want to be a little careful of that. Okay? Not that emotions don't come into play, they do. We must have confidence in God. Remember, that's faith, not in us. If I have confidence too much in myself, oh gosh, why? That'd be my first question. Now, how many of you are clerics? There were a couple out there. Okay. Clerics have a lot of self-confidence, generally. Okay. Generally do. Okay. Our own fidelities notwithstanding, God wants you in heaven if you'll let him do it. Okay? We must concern ourselves vitally with doing his will all through the course of our lives. We think of vocational decisions, that seminarians or young women entering the convent are making, and those are important, don't get me wrong, or people entering marriage. But oftentimes vocational decisions are constant along the way. Those of you who are married know you've had to make decisions based on your initial vocation forever, have you not? You think of raising children, you got to make a lot of decisions. Are those decisions based on charity? Okay, doing God's will. What does God want me to do here? For his will for each of us is life in abundance. Now, what are signs of that abundant life? Matthew Kelly lays them out in his Dynamic Catholicism. He says there's 4 basic traits: prayer, study, generosity, evangelization. Raising the heart and the mind to God, Teresa of Lisieux. Study, engaging our minds to better know God. Okay? For example, if you study theology, when properly understood, is very simple. It's faith seeking understanding. Now, what if you had a theologian who didn't believe in God? He'd be an interesting character, wouldn't he? I suspect some of the higher public universities who have religious departments have a lot of these. They'll talk the game. They'll study it like they would study the Peloponnesian War. But it's a lot more important than the Peloponnesian War. Okay? It's just not a topic. It's much more than that. Generosity, gratitude in action. Okay? In evangelization, probably the one that makes us the most uncomfortable, although I think that's changing. Setting the world ablaze. Because something we really have to be careful of. The future is not yet determined. Those of you who are older, do you remember the fall of communism? Did we see it coming, really? Most of us? Probably not. I had read some books in the 70s that rather accurately predicted what was going to happen. I was a student of that stuff. But at the time, it seemed as threatening in 1984 and 85 as ever. And by 89, it was collapsing. And by 91, it was gone, at least in the Soviet Union, which had been the most threatening. Who would have ever thought we'd get a pope from Poland, of all places? And that he would set the world on fire. And he did. Probably the greatest evangelizer of the century. Okay. Perhaps more so. By the way, we're called to do all these things. So why do we study the spiritual temperaments? Let's start narrowing in. The classic key to knowing yourself, getting along with others, and growing closer to the Lord. This is by Art and Lorraine Bennett, who have written a number of books on the subject. Okay. Hippocrates, going way back to the Hippocratic Oath, in medicine and all that, way back in about 450 BC, divided humanity into the 4 temperaments: Now, they didn't have great scientific, surgical, physical scientific skills, but they were perhaps more keen observers of the human condition than moderns are. Sanguine. Okay, we had some sanguines out there. Means blood. Now it's going to get worse. Wait till we get to the phlegmatics. Choleric, liver. Okay, got a few of those in here. Phlegmatic, phlegm. Kind of a mucus, you know. I'm glad I'm not teaching this during the winter when we've all got colds. Or the melancholic, the kidneys. Or sometimes you'll see them associated with air, fire, water, and earth. I won't get into that explanation. It would take too long. Some spiritual temperament basics. The headline doesn't show here. This is where my work won't help. Know yourself and begin to know God. Remember, you're created in His image. And as you get to know yourself, which isn't necessarily always the starting point, but as you truly get to know yourself, you will know Him better. Because one thing is, God makes nothing that isn't very good or very good. Okay? He created cats. Now, if you've got any cat people here, I apologize, but I'm a dog guy. Yeah, okay. Cats are good. I think dogs are a little better. No, I won't get into that. But human beings are very good. All of them are. God doesn't make any junk, as the old saying goes. We've got to get to know ourselves to allow ourselves to become, as Matthew Kelly says, become the best version of yourself. Okay? From Corinthians, at present, St. Paul said, we see indistinctly as in a mirror, but then face to face in heaven. Okay? At present, I know partially, then I shall know fully as I am fully known. Remember, God knows every hair in your head. Now, in my case, as I've said, that doesn't prove anything. Doesn't even prove His divinity. But in your cases, it does. If you treat an individual, God takes our humanness seriously. This is from a book called Authenticity by Father Tom Dubay. Next week, I'm going to try to remember to bring in, I'm going to pass out my list of favorite authors. Kind of can't go wrong authors. He's one of them. I happen to know him. His brother was a friend of mine. And it was a real privilege, just to know the guy. And he's a genuine mystic. Okay. Book Authenticity. All of his books are good, but that's a particularly good one. Goff. If you treat an individual as he is, he will stay as he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. Now, whether we're talking about treating somebody else or sometimes how we treat ourselves, what do we expect of ourselves? Become what you are, John Paul II. Very succinct in this case. John Paul II could write voluminously. He could write faster than I could read, because I know I was studying theology during that time, and we had an entire course just on him, and we just scratched the surface. I've read much of what he's written, but not the whole body. Understanding of self is critical to spiritual growth. Okay? I'm an old coach. I coached a lot of years. The first thing you got to do is teach your players not to beat themselves. Okay? Get rid of the bad habits. I can remember right in this gym over here coaching and coming up with this line. One of the things I was always enamored with Holy Family kids. Loved them. But when I first came here, they hadn't had a lot of coaching in a few years. And they turned the ball over like crazy. They gave it to the other team all the time. And I remember in practice once, I said, stop. I said, I can't stand it. I said, if you guys go to the bakery, I know what you're all ordering. It's a turnover. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, I want you to understand something. When you give the ball directly to the other team, in basketball, that's a mortal sin. Okay? I said, that kills you. That just destroys you. And I remember those guys thinking I was the craziest man on earth. And I would say we never were a great ball handling team, but toward the end, we went on and did pretty well. Got into some won a couple of titles. And we had gotten that down to where it didn't hurt us that much. We still weren't a great ball handling team, but again, we don't want to. In order to grow, we got to know what's wrong. Okay. Recognition of ease and difficulty. Some things probably in the spiritual life come pretty easy to you. No, it's a gift. Some things come with more difficulty. Okay. Does anybody know where that comes from? The spiritual temperament God gave you is good. He gave it to you for a reason, by the way. Original sin. That's the dent in the BMW. Or the door ding, somebody at the parking lot gets you. Got any of those yet?
No, but I've destroyed all my windows.
That's you. Okay, hitting the curbs? Okay. All right. Understand the effect of human temperament on the spiritual life. This is kind of where we're getting at. Okay, let's move on. What we love. Now, love here is kind of what we desire the most. This is more the passionate view of love. Every morning, you get up and go to war. Now, have any of you never heard that line? Is there anybody here who's never heard that? Feel free to say so. Never heard it. Okay. All right, you heard it from me first. That's a sad commentary on communication in the world today. Probably the most famous guy to say it is Chesterton in our era. But he's not the only one. He didn't start it. The church has 3 stages. The church militant is the church here on earth. We're in the battlefield. Now, who do you think number one enemy probably is? You're either going to get number 1 or number 2.
Ourselves?
Satan or ourselves. Well, we just boxed it all. It's right there. Oftentimes, it's right here. Okay. I remember one of my first years teaching RCA, and somebody asked the question, what do you think is the biggest problem with the Catholic Church? He was a skeptic. He was just sitting in on class. And I said, me. And he said, no, I'm really. I said, no, me. I said, I can't do anything about X, Y, and Z. I can do something about me, and I oftentimes don't. I'm oftentimes the biggest enemy. Those weaknesses we're going to be pointing out in a little bit. Those tendencies to cut the corners. We're going to try to get at those and why they might be there. Okay? The church militant. The other 2 stages, by the way, are the church triumphant, those in heaven. Does anyone know what the other status of the church is? The church suffering, those in purgatory. Okay? They're preparing for heaven. One of my favorite spiritual authors, and a guy I found out this not long ago. I've been reading this guy for almost 40 years. A guy named Dom Hubert von Zeller. He's a Benedictine monk, an artist. And I found out recently he did cartoons. And they weren't published. Kind of like almost like political cartoons, but more on the church and the spiritual life. And they're very subtle. His art is very subtle. The title of these, he published them under the name Brother Choleric. So, being a guy who likes spiritual temperaments and thinks it's valuable, I think he was onto something. But I have probably about a dozen of his books. In the spiritual life, the faculty of love, in other words, he's speaking here mostly of passionate love, at once the most excellent and the most dangerous thing in the world. False love can turn men into animals. True love can turn men into saints. Very simple. Or as St. Augustine said, know thyself and thy faults, and thus live. Okay. Discovering your own faults in a spiritually mature person is a joy. Now, I won't say it doesn't give you a little jab when you suddenly, any of you been around a while, at some point you realize, oh gosh, I've been a heel on this and I didn't even realize it. Yeah, it hurts. But then you can start to work on it. Okay? Okay, again, we're getting chopped here. The Christian heart of this matter. There are many spiritualities out in the world out there, right? All kinds. go to the spirituality section in a Barnes and Noble, most of the books on there are comic books. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be insulting, but there's not much there. There's a few good ones sneak through. The only authentic spirituality is a spirituality centered in Jesus Christ and through him into the Trinity. That's where we're going. We want to somehow get into this perfect communion here. Has Muhammad helped save anybody? Not officially. Certainly his teachings have probably helped some folks. Has Buddha, Confucius, others? Yeah, sure, some. Some of them misled too. You get a kind of mixed bag. We do have that blessing. Christ didn't mislead. He was the authentic. He's the real one. He's the one who died to get us to heaven. If a Muslim goes to heaven, it's not because Muhammad got him there. Christ got him there. Okay? Grace is the vital principle of the spiritual life, and it comes to us through the mediation of Jesus Christ. Nothing controversial there for any Christian. As St. Thomas always said, grace builds upon our nature. When we study temperaments, we're getting into our nature. Okay, what are we? Jesus Christ reminded us he is the way, the truth, and the life. He's the path, if you will. And the last thing, there are no planes in the spiritual life. Do you know what I mean by planes here? Flat surface, right. Okay? But think of the Great Plains. When you fly over much of the Midwest, flatter than a pancake. When I first came from hilly New England to here, the flatness drove me crazy for the first 6 months. I've gotten used to it. Okay? No planes in the spiritual life. You're either on your way up the mountain or you're sliding back. Now, that doesn't mean your feelings aren't going to feel flat at times. I can attest to you. I've done that a lot. But we always want to be advancing, whether it's perceptible to us or not. A few presuppositions. Temperament is God-given, and your temperament is not going to change. Some people think, well, I really like that temperament. I really like to become it. You may act a bit more like it and so forth, but your temperament is hardwired. We can only seek to work within it and make the most of it. God gave it to us, and he gave it to us for a reason. Mellowing its negatives and humbly embracing its gifts. The formation of character is essential or critical. That's the substance of spiritual growth. Developing your character, that virtuous day-to-day life. Character formation is possible. Now, the reason, why would I underline that? We're Catholic Christians. That should be obvious. There are many people who live in a determinist sense of the world. Have any of you ever looked at your astrology column? We think the stars and the planets dictate what's going to happen. How many of you remember the biorhythms? That was big. I can't remember how long ago, 30, 40 years ago, biorhythms. Yeah, it sounds about right. It was right after astrology went through a big wave and so forth. Now, let's not be too insulting here. St. Augustine bought into the Manichees, and they were a bit into the astrology. Some pretty bright people did for a time. Okay? I know some of the brightest people I know may have had a period of life where they bought into nonsense, and then they had a terrific wake-up. Okay? Character formation is possible, and it requires an ideal or a goal. You have to have a sense of where you're going. If you're going to make progress, you have to have a sense of where you are and where you're trying to go. The term progressive we hear in our culture now with politics they just constantly keep moving the starting and the ending points. You know, they get you all convinced you ought to do X. I always remember the vaccine. We're not going to take that because Trump did that. Well, when he got voted out, then they were going to force us all to have it, whether we wanted it or not. And I remember thinking, what's going on here? Forget all the side arguments and problems that went with that. They're just constantly moving the goalposts as to what is something we ought to seek. That's not progress. I don't know what it is. Chaos. So character This is where we talk about why do we have saints almost every day that we celebrate Mass? Saints are the models. They're the masters of love, and we need to copy them. Character formation requires a fair knowledge of oneself, one's strong and weak points, one's assets and defects. Okay, for those of you who did the test, understanding your result, or if you haven't done it, try to do it by next week. It might help a little bit. Understanding the results if you took the test. By the way, here is the one that I'm recommended, temperamentquiz.com. Of the 4 temperaments, people possess one dominant temperament and a secondary. Now, sometimes they may be pretty close. Sometimes they're a little more gappy, okay? You cannot have opposing temperaments. Otherwise, you'd be a contradiction. You know, when we get into what the temperaments measure, you'll begin to see why. Growth in character consists of the practice of the virtuous aspects of the dominant temperament and the reduction in its negative aspects of that temperament or your secondary temperament too. Okay, they all have their strengths and their weaknesses, the weaknesses brought on by original sin. Again, caused not by their flawed creation, but by the fall. Okay, the fall did a lot. We're going to begin the choleric. I'm going to teach them in the classic order. Choleric, sanguine tonight, and then next week we'll get into the melancholic and phlegmatic, okay? Now keep in mind, none of you that at least said that you're purely one. Nobody's purely one. You're always a dominant with a bit of a second, okay? Thank God, probably, you know, okay? We're going to talk about the choleric tonight, but we're going to start with a key principle. For those of you who are dominantly choleric, prayer may not come easy to you. And didn't Matthew Kelly say prayer is probably the most dominant trait of the dynamic Catholic? It doesn't mean that cholerics can't pray. I know some with great prayer lives. I really do. But it doesn't come as easy. Matthew Kelly said this: prayerlessness is one of the great torments of modern times. I couldn't agree with that statement more. There's an awful lot of people out there who don't pray at all. And then they wonder why they're kind of lost. Okay? Every family needs a prayer giant. They're kind of the engine room of the family. Okay? They're an engine, they're a teacher, they're an example. Daily prayer is the dominant quality of dynamic Catholics, because it's through prayer and the sacraments that we feed ourselves. It should begin the day. We should have at least some time of silence. If you have nothing today, if you have no silent prayer, try to start with 5 minutes. Don't try to start with an hour. You'll frustrate and go crazy, and you'll probably be so distracted by the end of that hour, you'll pull your hair. Well, in my case, that doesn't work either. But you get what I'm getting at? Start small. Take small, but grow a little every day. Don't try to massive leaps. We all love those big, huge conversion stories, and they can be true. But most conversions, almost all conversion, even those people eventually, but it's subtle, it's small. There may have been a big moment within it that finally pivoted it, but it was probably building for a long time. Even St. Augustine, he was probably about 16 years going through a crazy period of time, but finally, he just stepped over, and there he was. We must be convinced, and we must keep it a priority. In other words, set aside time for it, and barring death or taxes or whatever, do it. Start in small bites. If you've already got a rich prayer life going, always seek to try to improve it subtly. But the improvement we measure more by the fruit of it than how it feels. Because sometimes prayer is, God lets it get dry sometimes. Okay? Have any of you ever taught a little kid how to ride a bike, two-wheeler? Do you remember? Okay. I'm going to tell you a story about my eldest daughter. She's a choleric melancholic. I don't know which one dominates. Some of you are that. It's a very admirable combination. I love choleric melancholics. The miracle is that I haven't killed one of them too, because they will drive you nuts at times. My daughter was that. So I want you to imagine, she's my first daughter, little Korean girl, sawed off, kind of short. And we're teaching her how to ride the bike. Of course, we had the training wheels, right? She had been on the tricycle and then moves up to the training wheels. And you go along, and what you do, Dad sneaks it and raises the training wheels so they're more and more on the center wheel. They don't tell them that. And you watch, and then when they're hardly ever hitting that outside wheel, then it's time. When I took those things off, you would have thought I was bodily throwing her off the Empire State Building or something. She looked at me. If looks could kill, I'd have been a dead man. And I remember, so the first time I do it, what I do is I run alongside. I start with my hand on the steering wheel and one behind the seat, and I'm running along, and I say, now you steer. And I'm holding on back here. But at a given point, you're not really holding them up at all. Your hand is just there. It's a safety blanket. And you let go. Well, somehow my daughter, I can't do this. I have some neck damage up here from old sports injuries. She turned around without, and looked at me and like, you've let go of me. My God. Now, then the looks would definitely kill you. Okay, so why did I say all this? Okay. God will let us go a little bit. We have to be. In a certain case, it's sort of a testing. It's sort of giving us a chance to do it ourselves, to go further. I trust you all know how to ride a bike. Okay. It wouldn't be a big deal for you to get on a bike and ride a few miles, probably, if you're in shape to ride 20 miles. God leaves us off on our own a little bit. It's not that he's not there, but he's just alongside and he's not holding on anymore. He's getting you ready for the next level. Okay. We are spiritually healthy when nothing bothers us. That's a tough spiritual measure, isn't it? Teresa of Avila. Staggering claim, but it's true. Okay. Okay. 7 steps in prayer progress. I'm just going to click through these. You can figure them out. Gratitude in your personal dialogue with God and with others. Awareness. Revisit just the last day. So if you're praying tonight before you go to bed and do an examination of conscience, just look at today. Don't worry about yesterday. Just look at today. If your conscience is reasonably sensitive, you'll probably pick up some strengths. Would you do right? Maybe, that person in that other cubicle, still ticked me off. Okay. Significant moments. Can you see God's will and explore its possibilities in a given day? Peace. Ask for forgiveness for wrongs committed. And accept that peace. Accept that forgiveness. Freedom. Speak with God about what he's inviting you to do in order to become what you're called to become. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to be blunt with God. Teresa of Avila, you heard the story about her in the ride along in the ox cart? She and her brother were in the ox cart, and they were going along, and this thing didn't have a great suspension on it. It's the 1500s. Apparently hit a rock. They got kicked out of the ox cart and landed right in a mud puddle. And she literally turns up. Now, she was a woman of great prayer by that point in her life. And she was overheard saying, this is the way you treat your friends. You wonder why you have so few. That's honest, blunt talk with God. Okay? Others, lift up to God anyone you feel called to pray for. As my wife has been going through cancer, it's blown us away. The cards, but it's the prayer. That's what's means so much. My wife is a sentimental person, and she's gone to tears so many times over that of just absolute joy. Where going through cancer can be a joyous thing. They don't put that in the brochures. And finally, finish with a thoughtful Our Father he recommends. The Our Father is the richest rote prayer that we have. Thomas Aquinas refers to it as the 5th gospel. There's so much in it. Good prayer to say. Most people recommend it maybe 3 times during the day. Maybe in the morning, maybe midday somewhere when you get a break, lunch, again in the evening. Okay, gifts and challenges of the choleric Catholic. Now we're getting closer to analyzing you all. How can the choleric become the dynamic Catholic that God wishes her or him to become? Or if we want to look at it more minimally, how do we learn to live with a choleric? You know, okay. I notice I haven't told you what I, yeah, you know of what I speak. This part will probably be very easy for you. Okay. I'm not going to tell you what mine is. I'll let you try to guess later, but when I'm done. Okay. And again, my apologies for the chopping here. I'm not sure what's going on. Most of these are just Hollywood characters, or entertainment characters. But just give us a picture of what they might be like. How many of you remember the older ones of you? Steve McGarrett, Hawaii Five-0, that role he played. Very choleric guy, driven, workaholic, successful, all that. Captain Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, sitting in his command chair. Kind of a little later, although I don't watch a lot of TV, so I have to work at this. Harmon Rabb of, what was the show? Jag, I think. He was a fighter pilot kind of guy, very choleric. A real choleric, Francis Drake, the poor Englishman who took on the Spanish Empire and kind of won. Study his life. I always touch on the Winnie the Pooh series because they've got the 4 temperaments covered. Who is this? Rabbit, right? Rabbit's choleric. Okay, we don't tend to think of rabbits as choleric, but he has a bit of a choleric temperament. Okay, let's try to look at him. All right, the central thing of every temperament is how do they react to stimuli. So let's say, all right, Laura, I pick on you driving to class tonight. You're on your way. You're maybe running a little close to the wire on time. And some guy just utterly cuts you off in traffic. Really, almost like road rage cutoff on you. Now you're choleric, right?
Yeah, that's my one.
Okay. All right. So how does the choleric react? Because you've definitely had some stimuli here, right? Easily and strongly aroused. Yes? Probably?
Yes.
You may not take action. You're working. Okay. Now, remember, easily and strongly aroused is not necessarily bad. It can be. Yes, it can. And the impression lasts. Now, we'll use this same scenario for all 4 as we go through them. So let's pick on Laura because she's the BMW driver, right? Did I ever tell you my theory on when I became a commuter, when I started? I lived a mile away when I was in St. Charles for 38 years, so I didn't commute really. And I started coming here, and the one thing I figured out was people who drive German cars are the ones who are most likely to cut you off. I'm sure it wasn't you, okay? But I just noticed, if somebody cuts you off, Beamers are pretty high, Audis are up there, Volkswagens occasionally, Mercedes occasionally. But, I drive 394 and, 100 and all that. I'm sorry, I'm being very prejudicial here, but this plays into our scenario. So somebody really cuts Laura off. So Laura tromps the pedal and starts chasing this person. Reaches under her back seat, pulls out her tire iron if she can catch the guy. She's ready for a fight. All right? Now, you don't strike me as the type that would be that stupid, okay? That's more of a guy choleric probable thing, right? Notice, reacts strongly. Aroused, anger gets up in this case, but it could be delight too. And it stays, it lasts. With some of the temperaments, they may have the arousal, but it doesn't last. So it's all how these things play. Whether it's a true stimuli, like being cut off, or a perceived stimuli. Sometimes, we can perceive something that isn't there, but it stimulates us in one way or shape or form or the other. So what makes these cholerics tick? Okay, their enthusiasm is high, they're energetic, they're intelligent. We don't mean they're more intelligent than others, but they tend to have a very high practical intelligence. Okay? Kind of how to get things done. And they have a strong will. Okay, don't get in a will contest with a choleric. Okay, that's like getting That's like getting into I don't know how to describe this gracefully. Somebody once told me, and I won't do it, but old military guy gave me great advice one time. He said, don't get into I'll say it, peeing contest with a skunk. You're going to lose, you know. All right. The classic go-getter types, take charge, yeah, they're prone to. Accomplishes things quickly, oftentimes many things. They're very rapid in assessment of the practical. You know, what do we need to, you know, if we got trapped, if the building collapsed around us, we got 3 cholerics in here that we know of, they'd probably be the ones to get us out of here. They'd figure the way. Then they take action. They don't hesitate. They're not going to sit around and meditate while we all starve to death down here. Obstacles for them are challenges. They thrive on activity. Work tends to invigorate them. So you cholerics, a little bit of a workaholic maybe? Used to be. A little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's my minor temperament.
It's your minor temperament.
So
Okay.
it's not
So you're a minor workaholic. Okay.
You're
You've always struck me as hardworking, you know, having seen you.
a minor
Okay. They thrive on activity, if you will. Their rational is more than their sensual. Sensually, sometimes a little stilted. Macro is better than micro. So if I can ask you two guys, are you better in big picture or detail?
I'm actually very detailed.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think? I always go to the spouse in this
Yeah,
case.
he's awesome at long range vision.
Yes.
I mean,
Plan the finances for the family over the next 17 years. Yes.
I'm just grateful.
Okay.
He's the leader of our
Okay. Yeah. They're very good at macro grasp the big picture. They're doers. Okay. A few characters you may recognize over here that are like that. Notice they're not all wonderful people. A couple of them are a little dark, more than a little dark. You know, you got Adolf Hitler, Joe Stalin. Anybody know who the lady on the upper right is there? Joan of Arc. We needed Michelle here tonight she'd recognize that. John Paul II, I can't say for sure, but I suspect. I mean, the guy did everything everywhere and was utterly unafraid.
Yeah. Remember the
Yeah.
picture of the Black Madonna
Yeah.
we put on parade?
Yeah. Yeah. He just,
That was courageous.
he utterly courageous man and knew what he was trying to do. He transformed the church in many ways. You know, we're living still, you know, they're going into the papal conclave. And somebody asked me, you know, wow, who do you think is good? Yeah, nobody knows. God knows, we don't. I wouldn't mind if he came out, Habemus Papam Ioannis Paulis Tres. Well, no, that'd be Spanish and Latin mix, but you know, I wouldn't mind a John Paul III. Not that he's going to be John Paul II, but I wouldn't mind that, something on that angle. The church wasn't doing all that well at the time when he took over. It's doing a lot better now. Okay. Okay, what other traits? Trump is definitely a choleric. Okay, how do we know that? He didn't care what anybody thinks. Now that can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. Okay. George Bush, prior to him, he was the same. He was a quieter version, but much the same. Okay. Joan of Arc, 16-year-old woman who led the French army to victory. She must have been something. Okay. What do they have? Rapid grasp of essentials. They get right to the heart. What do we need to make something go? Decisive, capable, independent, and forthright. You can start going like this now. See, it's all good. Excellent concentration. They tend to be a bit singular. They'll focus on the goal and they'll aim for it. So your detailed thing is probably still goal. You got, okay, here's the goal over here, and I got to do this and this and this and this and this to get there. Like project management, isn't that kind of what you do a bit? Yeah, so you have to be both, okay? Constancy, magnanimity, they can be very, very generous, give of themselves tremendously. They'll keep a secret like a grave, which is a good trait. You know, if you get a confidence, they'll keep it. Great saints and great sinners. Okay. Some have argued that a majority of the canonized saints of the church, those declared saints, may be cholerics. Might even be a majority. And they are, cholerics and phlegmatics make up the smaller percentages of temperaments. Melancholics and sanguines are larger. They probably represent a third or a little higher, between the two of them, 2/3. And the other third is made up by the phlegmatic and choleric. So that's kind of stands up. Gosh, time is going too fast. I got to talk fast. They're practical rather than theoretical. This is kind of the contrast within them. They're great focus, but can go in 100 directions at once. Okay. Extroverted, but not in sharing their innermost feelings. They're quite open, but they don't share their inner feelings. Some have argued they don't really have them. No, I'm, you know, there is a little to that. Again, they're not prone to be highly sensitive types. Comfortable in great macro ideas, but bored with details. Essentialist bottom line types. More inclined to work than think. The Nike, you know, just do it. That's a choleric phrase. They never quit. They'll push through things that others would say, oh, forget it. Inactivity is repugnant. They look forward to the next great labor or project, can launch into action, but often prematurely because they have high self-trust. You know, you may want to think about before you try this. Oh no, I can build the Eiffel Tower. You know, might need a little help. No, I can do it. Okay. Again, sorry about the pet peeves. You know what you all know what a pet peeve is? Something small, usually that bothers you. Okay, here are the choleric peeves. Sentimentality, committees. You ever heard the phrase on committees? They're the unwilling doing the unnecessary for the unfit. If you've never heard that phrase, to me, it's a classic. A choleric wrote that phrase, I'm sure. Okay. Okay. Some people love committees, not cholerics. Let's get to the task. Let's not sit around and talk about it. Group projects, kind of a similar theme. People who don't get to the point. People who talk in, you know, circles. Whiners and complainers. You don't have any time for them. Process and details. Now, other temperaments like those things. Now, the bright side. Okay, I'll get to the dark side in the next slide, don't worry. Profound capacity to endure hardship. Obstacles, again, are seen as opportunities and challenges. They do not need the support of others. They're not joiners or crowd followers. Yeah, they're not just go along. If he can control his or her temperament, recollected through prayer, he or she can stay concentrated on the eternal goal. That's when they become great saints. And for all of us, that's something we have to do. We have to keep our eyes on the long haul. You know, let's remember where we're going to be eternally. That's good advice for all of us. If you can get the choleric there, they'll probably stay the course. Ready for the dark side? Okay. Okay, and it got chopped here. Oh yeah, this is bad. And I'm sorry it's going to be like this all night. I'll try to get in even earlier. I got in early and I still couldn't get it all fixed. I'm trying to figure out what's going wrong. The dark side. First of all, you recognize some of the pictures here? Martha Stewart. Now, my next door neighbor used to work for her. One time we were with him, and this is just a couple of years ago, she called him. He's a designer. And he enjoyed working for her. Now, he could get along with Godzilla. I mean, he really is. And he's a sharp guy. But I've been told she's not a lady you would want to necessarily work for regularly. Now, most people, Martha's tough. Most of you think I'm probably talking about Nixon. I'm actually talking about Charles Colson. Anybody know anything about him?
Well, he became Christian
Very much so.
in prison.
Yes, he went to prison. He was Nixon's one of right-hand men, hatchet men during the whole Watergate mess. And he was tough. And he deserved to go to prison. In prison, he got the faith. He's Christian. And for the rest of his, I don't know if he's still alive or not. I think he passed away a few years back. he led prison ministry, and he did it very well. And people, a lot of times they say, oh yeah, they get religion in prison, to look good. No, that doesn't seem to be that at all. He did some genuinely fine work there. Okay. Vladimir. Okay. You don't do what he does probably without this. Okay. For what you can't read, at the very top, ahead of anger, it says pride. Okay. Now, pride is the number one sin of humanity, right? That's what original sin was, and all of our other sins are imitations of that. Pride is a little tougher in cholerics. Okay. They're confident. They're a bit full of themselves at times. Sorry. Stubborn, opinionated. They frustrate with the slowness of detailed nature of others. Come on, let's get this done. Let's move. They can be domineering and ambitious. Anger, because impressions last. Remember, we go back to the reaction? The impression doesn't fade away. Then if it stews, it can really last. Okay? And it's outward. They're not going to turn it inward. There is one of the temperaments that'll do that. They'll turn it outward. It'll come out. Okay? And it can degenerate into hatred, especially versus those who would contradict them, resistance, and personal offense. Okay? Lacking tact and or sympathy can be a problem. Doesn't say all, but if they go dark, this is what shows up. They're not sentimental, they're factual. So there may not be the softness that ought to accompany them here. Task is more important than the person. That's not true. But sometimes that can dominate them. Okay. Deceit, disguise, hypocrisy. Oh, it's getting really warm and fuzzy now. Pride may overcome his or her nobility, and the dark choleric will often despise his fellow man. In other words, look down on them, which we ought never do, to look down on anyone. Again, they see them as obstacles. They get in the way. They don't want to wait for them, whatever it might be. In the worst, vengeance. You think of Joe Stalin. I mean, I don't know how many people he put to Mao Zedong, probably, put probably hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of millions of people to death in one form or another. Certainly many millions. Okay. And I'll talk about how each temperament manipulates. The choleric manipulates through anger, often feared for their outbursts, which can be, if they go really dark. Okay. That's how they manipulate people. Every temperament has those. This I won't dwell on because of time. The strengths and weaknesses, kind of the snapshot. Many of these we've already talked about. But notice here, I've put in red traits that are on both sides. The negative, the weakness, and the positive. Cares little about what others feel. Can leave them the independence to do what they think is right rather than go along with the crowd. But it can also mean they're not exact, when they greet you at the wake, hey, where's the bar? Kind of thing. No, I'm not saying I've ever seen that, but, yeah, he smoked too much anyway. No wonder he died. No, you don't say that then, but, could be. Okay. Again, some extremes here. Coping with your choleric spouse. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Show appreciation, even if he or she seems indifferent to that support. Cholerics don't, at least publicly, need the support of others to do what they do. And so sometimes they can diminish compliment. It's not important, but they still need it. We all need affirmation, okay? We have to be loyal to them. They will often, if you're not loyal to them, they can go dark, okay? They'll take a complaint, okay? And if you complain to them about something that involves them, they think you're attacking them, okay? Because they're so task-driven, they should have done it well. Task failure, okay? And they see it as disloyalty. Help and challenge them to distinguish accomplishment, a result from empathy to walk in their shoes, okay? find rejuvenating forms of recreation. They're prone to be workaholics. And sometimes their work is recreation, and it can be in some respects, but you got to find ways to get them outside of work. Now, raising choleric children. Okay. Those of you who've had a number of kids along the way, I have 4 kids. I have 4 temperaments. Now, one of mine is adopted. So, there's some who think this is inherited, and there's some merit potentially to that. I wouldn't say it's absolutely strict either. Okay, you got to give them high ideals and great thoughts. The demanding life of a Christian is good for them. Keep the lives of the saints in front of these guys, and they'll become like them, is the idea. Give them something really to strive for. Allowance or moderation for their narrower thought and focus. Opportunities for leadership. I have a son who's a choleric. Okay. Not sure if he's more melancholic or choleric, but he's one of the two. We were preparing a trip. My wife and I didn't have time to do it. We put him in charge of doing it. Did a great job. He planned it. It was fantastic. Okay. One of the best trips I've ever been on. Again, encouragement of empathy, firm correction, lack of care toward others. If I'm raising a choleric child and they get tough on somebody else when they ought not to, you dress them, you come at them. In other words, that's when the load of hay should fall on them. They should never look down, never destroy or pound on someone. In fact, the reverse, you try to take them with you when you go to the food shelter and things like that, and serve the poor and that kind of thing. Much better to do. Again, because they'll start thinking of themselves as superior, because on practical things they can be. Treat other persons with tenderness and understanding. Humility, divine focus, reconciliation, face up to your sins. Appreciation for the poor and the handicapped. You ever had a child, any of you, who didn't want to admit they were wrong? You may have seen some of this. They can be really iron on this. It's pride, and it runs deep in them. Appeal to their goodwill. Don't try to appeal to their bad will. You can't outwill them. They're too tough. Appreciate their gifts. Need to control and guide their energies. Endure in prayer, humility, sought to overcome their one great natural vice, which is pride. Okay? Again, I got to go fast because I'm already running late. A few of the great saints, and we missed the title up here. Some of them, St. Paul certainly was a cleric. James the Greater, Joan of Arc, Charles Borromeo, Francis Xavier, merely converted South Asia. Guy was unbelievable. He'd work all day and pray all night. Go. Catherine of Siena. She used to tell popes what to do. Ignatius. Okay. These are just some. A lot of them. Okay. Again, I won't go through all of this, but they accomplished extraordinarily, seemingly impossible, kind of over the top. No, you can't do this, but they did, because they spent their lives. Many of them died young. Many of them died young. Okay. Most of the ones I named to you, probably, I would say if we had an average age of death, I would say it's no higher than about 40. They had spent themselves. Okay. Their efforts transcend ordinary sanity. We think, oh, they're over the top. They're too much. No, they're not too much. This is precisely why God made them the way they are. Okay. Keen sense of mission and little care of self. Spent their entire life in service of God, the church, and society. We need people like that. Again, they can endure loneliness because they don't need others as much. They do, but not as much. What do we all need? What they need. That rich spiritual life that allows God to be your best friend. Okay, prayer is a great challenge, because just do it is not how prayer works. Those of us who are old enough and have suffered in our prayer life at times, just do it. Boy, isn't that brilliant spiritual advice? It's silly. It's not that easy. Again, they're prone to be active. So if you sat in the Adoration Chapel for an hour and you're having a little bit of a distracted evening, how many distractions might you have in an hour? Got to clean the garage, change the oil in the car. I got to do that. You know, is that kind of sometimes when you're having a distracted evening? That could be anybody, but a little more so there. Yeah. Okay. Study can be an asset area because they get to the essence of things quickly. Again, practical intelligence. But sometimes for some cholerics, it's too inactive. Study is too inactive. They got to get out and do. Generosity, if they get that outward orientation rather than pull it all to me, they can be extremely generous. Okay. Evangelization, they can transfer the essentials of the faith well. Okay. But they have to, get the idea of the who they're evangelizing. I'm going to go real fast here. The kind of, apart from God, you can do nothing. This is kind of the prescription for the choleric. Apart from God, you can do nothing. Okay. They got to draw the faith from the head to the heart. They're stronger here than they are here. Those two dimensions. It can be a long journey for the cleric. Don't worry, we'll get into another temperament. It's a long journey to go the other way. Okay. Need to be drawn from pride to humility. Humility is the key to the spiritual life anyway. And that's simply the humble person recognizes there is a God and I'm not him. They get that and they see the gap. Draw out their latent affectivity. Okay. And finally, draw them into the life of prayer. I won't go through the last, I have a section on how they're cross carriers or crosses to others, okay. So we'll move on. And again, sorry, they're all chopped up here. We'll start, we may have to go about 5 minutes late, but I'll talk fast. The sanguines. Okay, sanguines. Okay. Anybody else? Sanguine second? Okay. All right. Study sometimes can be a challenge. Now, you both seem like very bright people to me. I don't think this is probably a challenge. But let me describe what we mean by that. I have a daughter who's a sanguine. And she was a pretty good student. Every once in a while, she would absolutely jackknife a test. It would come out of left field and she'd blow it. And I went to school with people like this. I'm sitting there struggling like crazy trying to get some concept that's being taught. It was probably algebra. It never made sense to me. And I'm sitting next to a sanguine. Yeah, I get this stuff. Yeah, I'm getting it. Really? Gosh, I'm thinking, okay. A week later, we take the test, and I beat him by 15 points. The sanguine oftentimes has a kind of confidence that's based on a slight shallowness. Their big picture is social, not necessarily task or process. And as a result, they can have a high confidence when, in the case of my daughter, they shouldn't have. Okay? How does a sanguine go? I got to go faster than I intend. Again, we begin at the top. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Created in the image and likeness of God, we are meant to know. He gave us a marvelous mind. It's a finite mind, and it's a mind fallen due to original sin, a bit darkened, as St. Paul put it. But we have a mind, and it's there to come to conclusions, to come to knowledge, okay? We're capable of drawing conclusions. Our minds are a divine gift that helps us to draw us closer to God, okay? If you just pray and you just go to church and you don't study at all, and I've run into those types, they think, I can still go to heaven. Yes, you can. Not as easily, though. It would be like Laura's going to drive her BMW to California again. But she doesn't want to read the map. No GPS yet. Okay, well, we'll throw that away. Okay. You're probably going to get lost. Okay. Or worse, we'll send you someplace on the East Coast where everything on the East Coast you get lost, even with GPS. Okay. Okay. We have the capacity to know. We live in a strange age. Modern philosophy, been around for the last 500 to 700 years, emphasizes doubt. And that's been a curse on our age. Study like prayer takes us deeper into the fathomless mystery that is God. Prayer does that. Study does that. Don't do just one. Do them both. Twin extremes. Some people treat theology as unnecessary or unreachable. No, not at all. We can all pursue these things. Okay? Study fuels prayer, generosity, evangelization. Okay? Why does study fuel it? The more accurate picture we have of God that can come in prayer, certainly more so there, but also in our intellect, helps us to understand. I've seen some of you ask great questions this year. Why? Your minds are chewing on something. And when something, when somebody turns that light bulb on for you, I doubt it's me, but Father Moriarty maybe, but it's great. It suddenly opens up all kinds of little paths. Okay, things become clear and simple. And when they're simple, you're getting them. Okay, so let's move on here. That need to know. You think of the last two popes we've had. I'm not trying to knock Francis, God rest his soul. These guys were huge intellects. Okay, really something. God loves a cheerful giver. They both were. I mean, Pope Benedict, we think, wow, he stepped down. What is he doing? He was going blind. He was just about blind at that point. Okay? And he never wanted to be Pope. He absolutely tried not to be Pope. He tried to resign under John Paul II. I think 4 or 5 times he submitted his letter of resignation. John Paul said, no, we need you. He just kept it. He wanted to be a teacher, a professor, a writer. Or that guy at the bottom, Aquinas there. I talk about someone who did it. Okay. If you love me, keep my commandments. We live in a purposeless age of more questions and less people who can answer them. We've got to begin to turn that. And I think we are. Okay. We do not stumble into truth. It must be sought with humility and perseverance. Sometimes we think, finally the light bulb goes on, we think we've sort of stumbled into it. No. You've been working at that. Even if it's nothing else, the questions you have in your mind, you're working. You're studying with those. Okay, they're great. Okay, again, I'm going to skip through this one, but again, it opens us because again, our culture is very relativistic, materialistic, hedonistic. It's an unwise culture. Wisdom is lived truth. Think of it that way. Lived truth, okay, bears fruit. Love seeks to know all that it can about the beloved by study, by prayer. Okay, again, I'm going to give you a list next week of some authors I'm recommending. You may not find all of them, hit them, but hopefully one of them might click with you and maybe you read a little bit of their stuff. Okay, again, we need more people to do it. My first thing, I started giving this advice to people in the 1980s. Don't take anything about religion from the mainstream press. I said it then, it was true then, it's more true now. Spend at least 5 minutes a day reading about your faith. If that goes beyond that, great, but do that, okay? One of the things that I love about being a Catholic teacher is Catholicism makes sense. It holds together. It doesn't fall apart. Sometimes as individual members, we do. But it makes sense. It's synthetic. It fits together. Okay, let's get into the sanguines here. The top, it says the need for the right relationship. Okay, does anybody know who that is? St. Peter. Yes, St. Peter, right after the denials. He went out and wept bitterly. Peter was definitely a sanguine. Now, at times, could he be a buffoon? At times, could he be spectacular? Both. I don't think it's an accident that Christ put Peter in charge here. Okay? He knew what he was doing. There were times it looked like a questionable personnel decision. But in the end, Peter was something. Again, that sanguines are masters of relationships. Okay? That's a gift. Now here's where it's going to start getting tough because of the jump here. Up at the top, the sanguine temperament. Let's get to the heart of it. The pictures real quick. Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. Any of you ever seen the movie, the Shakespeare movie, Much Ado About Nothing? If you haven't, it's great. It's really entertaining, and it fits its title very well. It's Much Ado About Nothing. It's a very sanguine movie, okay? Bill Clinton would have been a sanguine. I was not a fan of Bill Clinton, okay? I did know someone who spent time with him. And they said what they couldn't believe was when you were in his presence, he was talking one-on-one with him, and he spent some time with him. He was very impressive personally. He could get along. He really could. And it wasn't just fluff and foo-foo. He was, you're the only person in the room. Okay, that kind of thing. All right. Some of you may remember John Candy. Now, I don't know if he personally had the temperament, but his roles, he was just a fun guy to, in his movies, I'd just look at him and he'd laugh. Died a rather tragic death, Gazelle. Okay, but think of Tigger. Bouncy, bouncy, fun, fun, fun. Life would be painful without the sanguines, all right? Reaction to stimuli. Easily and strongly aroused, just like our choleric friends, but it fades away quickly. So if Laura were a sanguine, and the same thing happened, the car cut her off, boom, boom, she gets out her tire iron, she's mad, she's going after him, but by the time she catches him, she's not really all that angry. She pulls the guy over, and the next thing they're going out for a glass of wine. Okay? They can be very disarming. That's not a bad trait. That's a good trait. Creative, fun-loving, high-spirited, enthusiastic, inspiring, fellowship, bright side, they're optimistic about life and others. Live in the present moment. Choleric tends to be long-term. Notice that short-term impressions fade quickly. They live in the moment. That's not all bad. Okay? Relationship, ability, and intentionality. If cholerics are doers, sanguines are talkers. More likely to be long talkers. One other temperament can have this trait at times. I'll go quick. This is their traits. Rapid grasp of relationships, very attuned to their senses, gifted at spirit lifting, plenty of friends, acquaintances, fun, enjoyable, happy-go-lucky, live for and in the moment, great at personal hospitality. If you know someone, you just enjoy spending time with them just because they're so hospitable, they may very well be this. I'm not saying others can't, but this is often what I've found. They recover from falls well. Peter, he fell a number of times pretty hard, especially in the garden, or not in the garden, well, he fell in the garden too, but, outside of the Praetorium. Yeah, he failed pretty bad. But he came back, okay? Naturally gifted evangelizers. They can spread the faith. The contrasts, they seek acceptance more than truth because they're social. Friendly and social, yet comparatively blind toward the effect of their actions. Sometimes they're so busy fixing the moment, they forget the long-term effect of what I may have done here to smooth this over. Extroverted people pleaser, but lack commitment to duty sometimes. Again, long-term is a challenge. They start many things, but follow through is often lacking. You might notice that in sanguine children. Learn quickly, but without depth. My daughter, Teresa. Okay. Repent easily, but can easily succumb to temptation, because again, that living in the moment. Excel at art, oratory, etc., but rarely at deeper scholarship. Now, I know some wonderful exceptions to that, but generally speaking. Most amiable and attractive temperament, sometimes until a serious situation develops, and then they can seem to be kind of enigmatic. Their peeves, not many. There's not much that ticks them off, okay? They don't like detailed, arduous tasks and projects, generally speaking. Scholarship, that long, drawn-out, get to the PhD in advanced quantum mechanics, probably not, okay? When someone doesn't like them, this can drive them crazy. I have a friend of mine, he's one of the best guys I know in my life. He's an utterly sanguine man, and he is genuinely well-liked. But I remember he and I were teaching together, and there was a very nice girl in the 8th grade class who couldn't stand him and really liked me, and it drove him crazy. It really did. I felt bad for him. It was like he was really suffering. They struggle when they can't turn it into fun, can't get a good laugh out of it. Okay. The bright side. People-oriented persons. Okay. They recover well as they don't harbor grudges. That's a really good trait. Okay. If they discover Jesus as the friend, they can grow in depth and constancy. Natural attractiveness makes them, again, great evangelizers. They can easily draw others to follow them. It's an enjoyable path. The dark side. Okay, Facebook. Now, Facebook is I don't use it, but it's the perfect platform for a sanguine. It's a mile wide and a 1/4 inch deep, right? There's not much there. It's all horizontal, if you think about it, okay? We look at some of the pictures here. The character, Sam Malone, Cheers, Boston, very sanguine. Genuine, Magic Johnson, the basketball player of the Lakers. I don't know if she is. Kate Middleton, I always say this, she's the royalty, British royalty. She gave up Catholicism in order to become the Princess of Wales, because you have to be Anglican. Now, ironically, her husband now apparently is flirting with not remaining in the Anglican Church. Yeah. So she seems to have a social polish. She seems to have all that. And she has certainly a certain grace about her. She may be a very substantive person. I don't know. But kind of the public impression is a bit sanguine. Okay. The dark side can be prone to have an undisciplined set of beliefs based on personal preference without spiritual formation. Does that sound like Bill Clinton? Yeah. Rash, imprudent, impulsive, can be. Reluctant to admonish. They don't like to talk down their peers. Sometimes we have to do fraternal correction. High desire for limelight can foul their relationships because others get jealous. All that. Will take things personally, but they have a quick recovery time. If you do offend them, they recover fast. They manipulate through their charm and laughter. Okay. I won't dwell on the snapshot, but again, the traits that are on both sides, sensual. Sensual is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're entirely sensual, that can be a little bit troublesome. Your sanguine spouse. Don't be a wet blanket. Keep joy a priority, especially if you are a melancholic. No, we'll get into that next week. I had to tip it here a little bit. Give overt attention and display affection. Sense awareness needs a certain feeding. Appreciate their optimism and enthusiasm, but help them to stay focused. Draw them to gently toward depth and reflection. Require care in the relationship. If you can, if I did not marry a sanguine. If I did, the weekly date night thing, even when you've been married almost 50 years, is probably a good thing. Okay? Something like that, anyway. Okay? Again, uplift. Let them entertain and volunteer. They tend to do it a lot. But guard against their own. They can get into so many things that they kind of fall apart. Help them in the details and long term and go to depth. Avoid the absolute. I always, you never. Probably good advice anyway. Sometimes happens in marriage. Sanguine children, oh boy. I had at least one of these. Definitely had one of these. They connect well and quickly with others. Don't praise them for their likability. Okay? That's what they naturally are gifted at, because it can lead to vanity. Everybody gotta like me. I'm so likable. I got a granddaughter who's got me wrapped around her finger, and I gotta watch that. Oh. Enjoy them, but don't be taken in by that affability. You have to sometimes, as an adult with them, you got to be firm. Sometimes, I wouldn't say be harsh and repressive. It doesn't work with them. But you got to be firm with them. Because they can charm the socks off you. They really can. And you got to recognize that. I know as a school teacher, that's one of the things I had to recognize. I had students who could charm the socks out of me too, but I could never let them get away with it. They could never know they could. Otherwise, I'm toast up there, and it's all done. Got to lengthen their span of attention, okay? help them manage their time and praise when they persevere, have clear limits and expectations. Again, an orderly life, not a repressive life, but an orderly life is needed. Have them seek noble ideas. Don't leave them to their own devices. Curiosity may go some places. Watch their friendships, probably more than anyone, because they'll have and media habits today. That's almost the same thing now. They need good friends and examples. If they have donkeys as friends, they'll become just like them. And all know the trouble that can cause. Develop their self-control and discipline. Ooh, gosh, I know we're over a bit. Some of the likely saints: Peter the Apostle, John Chrysostom, who was also, I think, nicknamed the Golden Tongue or something like that. Brilliant speaker. Teresa of Avila had a bit of this. She was probably like you, a choleric, sanguine choleric, some combination of that. And very formidable woman, okay? Natural leaders, gifted evangelists, overcame the tendency towards shallowness that sometimes accompanies this thing. Humility allowed them to become no nonsense. Again, we got to get to God. Spiritual development is the key. Christ became the central relationship. Okay. Less in need of others. Recover from sin and limitations well, drew others to Christ in remarkable numbers. If I had more time, I'd tell you about Teresa of Avila. I may talk that next week if I can. It's Father's fault. He came in and stole my first 10 minutes. Didn't say that. Apologies, I'll be in the confessional. Okay. Again, some of the traits. Naturals at evangelization. Prayer may be difficult for them to sustain. Not to do, but to sustain when it gets dry, as prayer will from time to time. Study may not be their forte. Again, they got to take it to more depth. Their generosity can be really strong at the time and talent level. It may be more of a challenge at the treasure level. We give our time, talent, treasure. They're not typically money people, but I have one friend who's very active in the financial world, and he's good, and he's very sanguine. But he's more the exception. Okay, don't find a lot of them there. The prescription: draw the faith from the heart to the head. Again, might be a distance. Draw the strong desire to be liked toward becoming genuine givers. Okay. Overcome their affability toward discipline, need for genuine love, growth in discipline to overcome their natural shallowness. Don't let them come up short. Persevere into deeper things. Okay. Pull them deeper into the life of prayer. They can be naturally gifted at it because relationally they're strong. If you take that sanguine strength in human relationships and convert it to divine relationship, well, a lot good can happen. I won't get into cross carriers and so forth too much. Let's close with a prayer from Teresa of Avila. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Let nothing perturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things pass. God does not change. Patience achieves everything. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Sorry. Let me just shut this off over here. Any remaining questions on anything?